Grace. I noticed that our back screens are no longer working, and Grace is going to investigate why. We have one more thing that we'd like to do today before we begin our Legends panel. If you've opened your program and looked through it, you've seen a picture of Patrick Jackson. We tried to get as much of his bio as we could into the program. It would have taken another 4-page signature probably. And every time I look at that picture of Patrick, I think, I never saw him that still in his life. He was always in motion. Now, many of you in the room probably knew Patrick Jackson. Many more of you, I'm sure, heard him speak because he was the most requested year after year after year speaker at every public relations meeting in the country. And he would go and he would talk about his vision. The best thing about Pat was not only did he have the vision and he had it nailed so perfectly that he made it crystal clear for all of us, but he also knew how to go out and tell it and how to sell it. I think of Pat sometimes like the Johnny Appleseed of public relations thought. He went from city to city, campus to campus, town to town, talking about what our profession is and what it can be and what it should be. I said to him once, you know, you say the same things over and over and over again. First he said, well, yeah, it's about repetition. But he wanted to make sure that we got it. But then he wanted to go one step further, and he wanted to make sure that we went out and practiced public relations with utmost integrity, with the highest ethics, and with a real understanding of the role that we can play in the world. So when it became my sad task after Patrick died in April, to look ahead to this conference and say, how can we best remember Patrick Jackson? I said, I hope somewhere, somebody, sometime got him on video. And we knew there was a video that Otto Lurbinger had made with Pat, and it was an interview. It was a one-on-one, sit around a table, and we couldn't find the dreaded tape anywhere. And we looked high and low, and finally, a week ago, right before I left to come down here, Otto found the original work tape. Now I gotta tell you, the first thing you'll notice when it comes up is it has the time codes burnt into it, because it's the work tape. And they're there, and you'll find when you start listening to Pat talk, you won't even notice that they're there anymore when you listen to what he's saying. The other thing you'll notice is Pat Jackson's hard to edit. It's a 90-minute tape, and I was trying to pull the best sound bites out of it, and he rarely took a breath. Russell Grant from our media services department said, that was just 2 minutes and 13 seconds, and I swear he didn't breathe. So you'll notice some of the cuts are a little rough. Sometimes you'll hear Otto's voice, and then it's like, cut Otto and go back to Pat. But what will shine clear in this tape is the vision of this amazing, amazing man. So we want to play this for you so that just in case there's some of you out there who didn't know Patrick Jackson and had never heard Patrick Jackson, now you get just a little bit of it. And for all those of us who knew him and admired him and respected him and loved him and now are left to try and walk in his shoes, we have to remember, it's just like E.T. said at the very end, when Elliot said, I don't want you to leave. We didn't want Pat to leave quite just yet. But he did. But E.T. leaned out to Elliot and said, don't worry, I'll be right here. And Pat Jackson, for all of us, is right here. I hear his voice consistently telling me how to practice PR and what to do with PRSA. And he's right here. Let's look at a tape, the retrospective, just a little slice of Patrick Jackson.
He really has an interest in pushing the frontiers of the field forward and has developed a number of theories and models for practice. And I also like to have them say that our speaker today has a belief that public relations is a lot more than just a professional practice, but that we're really talking about the democratic way of life, how our society operates. Every profession, every organization we know exists only by public consent. It's my belief that the public has consented to allow the public relations body of knowledge and public relations professionals into society on the premise that we serve an overriding social benefit. And I think that social benefit is that if you're going to have a society where the people are going to have a voice in decisions that affect their lives, if we're going to be a democracy, in other words, that you need then a true profession which has the assignment of bringing people in touch with organizations and ideas and leaders in a way that they can impact them, so that people really can go into these decisions with a base of knowledge, a base of some understanding. And so I believe that the public relations practitioner is really the practical applier, if you will, of Jeffersonian theory. And that if we weren't here, you'd have to invent somebody to do that, because how can a person have any knowledge of what's happening in their local school, their local hospital, the organizations that produce the products they buy, the public and private organizations that impact society, unless there's a person inside those organizations that is doing two things. One, trying to give them information, and second, trying to give them access. In other words, to listen to what they're thinking and to try and bring out that harmonious relationship between them. And so I think that this positions public relations, if you will, in society as something that we who are in the field should be extremely proud of. But we have to remember that that's what gives us our consent. And if we go too far just counseling our clients and pushing our clients' agendas, then we're not being totally professional. There's no doubt, if you review the cases and just review the history of public relations, that the only long-term strategy for any organization is to become so close to their key publics that, in fact, it's a co-authorship. That those key publics are helping to shape the organization's policies and products and stands on issues. Because otherwise, you're not in a harmonious relationship at all. You're in a confrontational relationship. Now, I think what's misunderstood here is that when we say that, a lot of people figure that they should just pander to the key publics. Well, clearly, those publics don't know as much. If you're talking about education, for example, the publics out there can't possibly know as much about education as the teachers and the superintendents and the principals and the experts in that field. So there is also an advocacy role here. You might call it an educational role. And that's what I was saying earlier, that we really have this responsibility to see that the key publics we have to work with have enough understanding so that they can participate in the decisions. But any organization that doesn't make those decisions participatively and jointly is just asking for trouble, and I believe the record proves it. If you talk about trust, you have to ask yourself, how do you get to trust? The ability to get to trust by sending information transfer or even by two-way communication is very slim, because it's a totally cranial thing. It's all intellectual, and that's not where trust is. Trust is in our emotions and in our intuitions, and all of those together let us trust people. In fact, the psychologists, if my reading is correct, tell us that trust is a lot more in our skin and body than it is in our minds. There's just all these signals coming to us. And so I believe you have to move beyond communications to really building relationships with people, so that you know each other a little bit, or the publics out there know the organization, know some of their people, know their policies, have had a chance to try them out and make sure that they're real. And then In addition to that, this relationship has to be built in a way. You can have a relationship which is not, of course, trusting. So you have to build it in a way that gives trust. My understanding of the behavioral sciences, particularly psychology, is that trust arises primarily from one thing and one thing only, and that is consistency. And that's where I see so many organizations making a mistake. If you're going to have an open communication policy, for instance, it has to always be an open communication policy. You can't be open when the news is good, and then suddenly, oh, well, you know, close when the news is bad. And so, but if we will adopt open communications policies, build relationships, I believe that that trust that leads to behavior is, in fact, readily there. But notice what it means. It means we have to be able to persuade clients to admit when they are wrong. We have to persuade clients to listen to people inside the organization at lower levels who may have real wisdom to impart. It means we have to turn some of our decision-making authority over to the publics that we want to serve. And unfortunately, the big barrier in our era, I believe, is the way we train American managers. You know, the MBA system is a totally anti-human system. It teaches manipulation as far as I understand it. And so that gives the public relations people, again, this incredibly important social role of helping managers that are our clients or our colleagues to overcome that and learn this philosophy of real co-authorship. Relationships can be built quickly sometimes, but relationships that really engender trust take time to mature. And, you know, this whole silly problem in American organizations of the short-term quick fix. And too many public relations people, in my view, who are still hung up on one-way information transfer. We'll get a big story in the media. We'll have a TV show. Tend to forget that all that does is to create awareness. The people have had no chance to ask questions, to try out the organization, its products, policies. And so if you think of your own life, the really important relationships in your life don't just sort of happen on a weekend. You know, you take time, even with your own family, with your own kids or relatives. It takes time. And besides which, the one thing that I think the history of public relations also makes clear is that it isn't just, as they say in the military, winning the battle. It's winning the war. And if 10 years from now, or even a year from now, your great victory of a year ago has turned to ashes and they're all angry, I mean, that was just a waste of resources, a missed opportunity. I think it helps to have enough ego that you don't want to be a little cog. And if you want to be a bigger cog, you start thinking about, hey, how does this system really run? And where could I have maximum input and impact in the system? And so if you start looking at that, you can see that it's strategic. It's getting organizations really to mesh with their publics. So that's where the most fun and the most action is.
You mentioned some.
One of the things I could do was to go out and cheerlead a little bit and raise people's sights, show them what I thought the field could be, and if that was a skill I had, I thought I ought to bring it to the job. One of our problems is that we have to be generalists. There is no human activity, certainly no professional or vocational activity, that has more variables in it than building relationships that engender trust, that motivate mutually supportive behaviors. I mean, it's that wonderful story, you know, about the Frenchman who discovered that brain surgery was the most difficult profession. Why, he didn't know what he was talking about. As I say, every time the brain surgeon cuts into the cranium, the pieces are in the same place. Whereas, can you ever imagine a public relations case where the pieces are all in the same place, or where they're even in the same place between Monday and Friday? Once we get these systems and models in place, then our work is going to switch to real thinking about strategies. How do we get over this difficult situation? How do we take advantage of this opportunity? How do we move society and move the organization in the next 4 or 5 years? And you know, that's heady stuff. I would like to be remembered for having really pushed the profession to understand the high calling that this is. That, you know, if you want to really get